Good evening. All right. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us this evening. We are united tonight to protect family values. We unite tonight with the sole purpose to protect our children because our parental rights are under attack. The group that we have assembled here tonight, leading this event, are Americans from all walks of life and backgrounds. We treat our fellow man and woman and neighbor with respect. The common thread with all of us are the children that connects us in a profound way. This is not an event to complain and get angry, but to listen and then act accordingly. This is an educational event that outlines what is happening in our schools, government, and their agenda. And we're here to tell you the truth. All Americans have the right to raise their children accordingly, and how they do that under their roof is their business. We respect what you do under your roof. My name is Darren Badillo, and I'm here today as a concerned father, community leader, and advocate who has been fighting for our children the past 4 years. How I got involved fighting for our children. I know you remember when we had the pandemic and Johnny O closed their schools, closed their businesses, but left open the nightclubs and strip clubs. Do you remember when we had to walk in the restaurant with our mask on and then get to the table and you could take it off and eat your food? You know, and then at the same time, we've seen other surrounding counties and states open their schools, while in Baltimore County we were closed. Something didn't seem right to me at that time. I saw how the school closures affected my children, but also I was a director of operations for our youth mentorship program, where every Friday night we had 150 at-risk youth come, and I saw how the pandemic affected them. It didn't make sense to me. Again, strip clubs and nightclubs are open, but our kids had to learn virtually. Didn't make any sense to me, and I had to do something about it. So what I did is I saw a local organization, they were the Baltimore County Parent and Student Coalition. They were holding a rally to reopen our schools, because at that time, we didn't know what was going on. Nobody was telling us anything. We're like, when's somebody gonna tell us when they're gonna open? The county executive wasn't saying anything. The superintendent wasn't saying nothing. So parents are like, we want answers now. So we got involved. I got involved with that local group. I spoke there, and Mary and Amy, you know, they were fighting for our children. I decided, you know what, I want to support them, but also how can I get involved? And I started getting involved. Started advocating for our children, attending rallies. I even ran for public office. I was motivated to do something because what was happening to our children was not right. I learned something during the pandemic, and fighting the school boards, the teachers' unions, and the elected officials. You need to fight 6 months to a year in advance. If you're fighting on the topics that are going on right now, you're losing. That's why we're here tonight. We have major problems in our schools in Maryland, but I'll specifically talk about Baltimore County. According to the state report card, BCPS last year, 31% of elementary school students, 11% of middle school students, and 28% of high school students were proficient in math. Last year, 43% of elementary school students, 51% of high school students were proficient in English language arts. The majority of BCPS students are not proficient in math and ELA. On the state MCAT test last spring, third graders who are now in fourth grade scored 43.9% proficient in ELA, below the state's average of 48%. The MCAT tested last year, third grade scored 35% proficient in math, below the state average of 40%. Also, third graders scored 29.4% proficient in science, below the 34.5% average, Both the state and BCS scores are extremely concerning, and they do not align with graduation rates. You know, during the pandemic, the Department of Education said that they need to hire 250,000 students and mentors to work in our schools in the United States to help our children from the learning loss. We should have never shut our schools down. They knew it would harm them. Nothing has been done yet for our children. And what they have done is they changed many things in their school to lower expectations. And I just want to share something that I got an email today from a teacher. And she said children in 3rd grade or less, you know, and it's been going on for years, no longer get the A, B, C, D, and E that we used to get. You know, they get a P range. And that ranges from, they get a CD, means consistently developing, P for progressing, and N for needs improvement. So a 3rd grade teacher said a CD can be an A or B, but a P range can range from 40% to 79%. So that means that a child can be getting a P, and a parent thinks that they are being successful in school, but they're actually failing. A 5th grade teacher told me this week that they're not allowed to give any student anything under 50%. Let me read that again. A 5th grade teacher said they're not allowed to give any student anything under 50%. Automatically go into LS. If they do miss an assignment, they get 50%. If they get less than 50%, they get a 50% score. So this is why I have a problem with some of our youngest children knowing their pronouns, but don't know how to read or write. The issue is our schools are for academic learning, not for ideological promotion. Yeah, thank you. I want to say that again. Let me say that one more time. The issue is our schools are for academic learning, not for ideology promotion. Now we have some things happen in our schools in the United States, and we're worried that we don't want them to come here. So that's why we're getting ahead of it. We know in California, if your child identifies a certain way and you don't agree with it, they can take your child. Another incident where the government can take your child for not giving them the medicine that they want them to have. If you decide you don't want to give them the medicine, they can take your child. We now see in New Mexico, they're placing tampon dispensaries in elementary school bathrooms. We have a president that thinks it's okay to shower with your daughter. We have some who think it's okay for a male to shower with a female in the bathroom. A 17-year-old boy can shower with a 13-year-old girl. Our schools are failing. They're trying to take away our parental rights. We need to stop the bleeding. Enough is enough. I'm going to introduce you to some parents and leaders in our community that will help you have some insight, but as well as some direction about what's going on in our schools and our state. And I'm going to start with our first speaker tonight. It's Ashley Stevers. She's a mother and a prior Baltimore County school employee.
Hi, my name is Ashley Stivers. I work for Baltimore County Schools. What led me to speak today was the situation that happened at my son's school. About 2 weeks after he started, my son said something went against his religion, and the teacher sat there and called me immediately with the principal, and which led to another situation that happened, which as a parent I was extremely upset about. He was bullied by the school system, by the adults that I trusted. He was sharing his faith and argued that something went against the religion. And when he spoke up, he was threatened with a phone call home by the teacher at BCPS. I created a plan with Baltimore County with his beliefs. However, when he began to share his faith with his friends during breaks, the plan was dismissed and he was threatened to the office and with the email with further actions would be taken. When kids go to school, they're supposed to go to school to feel safe, not threatened, especially by the adults that we trust. Some would argue that religion should not be in school. and should be allowed in school. But I would argue that neither should LGBT, gender identity, and boys and girls going in the same bathrooms. Kids should not be bullied in school at all by adults, especially the ones that they trust. Here's another example that I had in a classroom that I worked at, in a kindergarten classroom. Kindergartners were exposed to the LGBT gender. They knew a kid was a certain gender, and the kid in the middle of the school year switched. They were read a book, and Baltimore County worked with that family. Our main focus should be on children's education, making these classrooms safe for these children, getting our kids back on track, and helping those who fall behind. Not discriminating, bullying based on their beliefs. We shouldn't be pushing agendas on these kids that aren't taught at home and go against their religion. We should leave that to the parents. Our tax monies go towards the school system. I feel that parents should have the right to decide where the funding for their kids go. Being a single parent, I was forced to come up with the money for my son's education. And the flag that stands at every single school symbolizes the right to freedom of speech, religion, the right that brave men and women have fought for. The Bible talks about that there will be a day that they call good evil and evil good. We've reached out in Baltimore County where a child gets threatened with further actions for sharing his faith. And when it's okay for boys and girls to learn about something that's not true, gender identity, and share the same bathroom with the opposite sex. We failed to protect the constitutional rights. We failed our children. We should be encouraging our children to step forward, to be brave, and to share their faith. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Ashley. And next I have Jeff Trimbath. He has nearly 3 decades of experience in conservative public policy, faith leadership and development at both the state and federal level. He has served several DC-based conservative organizations and served over 6 years in the administration of President George W. Bush. He believes strongly in values of faith, family, and freedom as the bedrock of our nation, and he desires to see those values permeating every corner of our society. Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff Trimbath, Maryland Family Institute, a brand new organization. Our vision is a Maryland where God is honored, life is cherished, families flourish, and religious liberty thrives. Now, you might say that's a crazy mission for a place like Maryland, right? And I would not necessarily disagree with you. That's why we have a very tightly sort of formulated mission statement, and that is engaging and equipping God's people to advance faith, family, and freedom in Maryland's capital, church, and culture. We may not be able to affect all of what goes on statewide here, but we can certainly educate and inform God's people about what's going on and then engage them so that they can become active in these issues. That's our mission at Maryland Family Institute. You've walked into a room that features a Catholic priest, a Baptist deacon, a Presbyterian elder, and 2 Muslim scholars. Sounds like a joke, right? It sounds like the beginning of a joke, but I can tell you the subject is not anything to laugh about. We all agree that kids need mommies and daddies who are married to each other, present in their lives, and that the state and all the other institutions of our society need to support that basic family unit. And unfortunately, all too often over the last several years, the state has undermined that basic human relationship. And so I've been asked to talk about how some of the actions in Annapolis have affected the family unit. I'm so delighted to see Representative Arakan and Representative Schlega, our great friends here. Support them, pray for them, would you? They are standing on the front lines for the family in Annapolis. I can tell you that from personal experience. They are right there in the fight every day, especially from the middle of January to the beginning of April. We see a lot of each other, and so just delighted that you're here. Ambassador Sauerbrey, thank you for being here. You've been a huge fan of ours at Maryland Family Institute. So grateful for your leadership. Thank you for being here. So I've been asked to talk about some of the threats to parental rights and then what you can do about that. I will cut to the chase immediately with regard to what you can do. On each of your chairs is a sign-up card. We want to keep you informed about what is going on in Annapolis, and if you fill this out and put it in the box at the back at our table with my colleagues Lila or Leanne, we will keep you informed about what's going on in Annapolis so that you can engage on those issues. With regard to the last session, I'm going to tell you the bad, the ugly, but also the good, okay? The bad, the ugly, and also the good. Perhaps the most egregious attack on family values came with the passage of HB 522, which was sponsored by Delegate Jones of Anne Arundel County. This is the bill that expands the services that are available to students in Maryland public schools from mental health to now full telehealth services without parental permission or notification. Now, in the bill, it does talk about parental rights, but there's a giant loophole in that bill that says that the school does not have to pay attention to those rights in cases of emergencies. Well, guess who defines what an emergency is? Guess what those conversations are like? We don't know because we're not told. Each public school in Maryland is now forced, because of this bill, to devote a space in the school and to contract with health services for students as young as 12 years old without parental notification or approval. That's the bad. The ugly, I would say, came with the so-called Freedom to Read Act, HB 785, which was the centerpiece legislation of Delegate Jones, the Speaker of the House of Delegates. This was the centerpiece of what she called her decency agenda. That was literally the term that she used. And what does this bill do, HB 785? Well, it's kind of a contorted sort of 30-page bill, 2 sections to it. The first 3 pages have to do with public school libraries. And now in public school libraries, you're not allowed to discriminate in terms of authorship of books, any authors in terms of their politics, their religion, or their origin. So all of those are allowed now in public school libraries. There is a process whereby local public schools can consider age appropriateness with regard to those materials, which was a concession that they gave at the end. But that's the first part of the bill. The second part of the bill has to do with publicly funded libraries, community libraries in the state. I don't know, for those of you who are parents, I know when my 3 kids were born, we loved to go to the Crofton, Maryland Library. We went there every week. Well, now, publicly funded local libraries, thanks to the Freedom to Read Act, can impose no standard on who gets what materials at all. So all materials are made available to all comers. What that means is that your 7-year-old can have full access to the porn and the smut that is currently in the library. And I see Representative Arikan nodding her head at this because she had the courage to read some of the excerpts of this material on the floor of the House of Delegates. She was roundly chastised by her colleagues because they were embarrassed by the material of this stuff. And everyone in this room would be embarrassed too. This is not classics of American literature. That's what they want you to think it is. It's not that. It is porn and smut for kids. It's illegal in a commercial setting in Maryland. Businesses are not allowed to make this stuff available to young people. Our view is that if it's illegal in a commercial setting, it ought to certainly be illegal in an educational setting here in Maryland. And this all in the name of decency. Literally in the Maryland Code, section 11201, it defines what indecency is. That's what the statute says. It's the very opposite of what this bill does. I'm so glad the previous speaker quoted from Isaiah 5, those who call good evil and evil good. This, if you're a pastor or a priest and you're preaching on that sermon, you now have your new sermon illustration for what that means today. It's the Freedom to Read Act under the speaker's decency agenda. That's what that is. So that's the bad and the ugly, but let me tell you some of the good. And that's HB 5-8. This was the bill that Delegate Atterbury from Howard County, the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, very nice lady. We've testified before her many times at the Maryland Family Institute. This is the bill that would finally remove parental opt-out from sexual orientation and gender identity material for all Maryland public school families. Take it out. You no longer can opt your kid out of those subjects in all Maryland schools. That's what this bill would have done. It passed the House. It made it over to the Senate. Thankfully, because of some behind-the-scenes work, it never made it out of committee. But great. But I can guarantee you, and I'm sure my colleagues from Annapolis will affirm me in this, it will be back. It will be back. And so we need all of you to be aware of that. We will keep you aware of that once it's introduced, and you'll be engaged on that issue. It absolutely will be back. So that's the current state of the affairs with regard. There's lots more that we can talk about and other bills that I can tell you about, but that's sort of a summary. Where do we head from here? I want to talk about the biggest threat to parental rights between now and the end of the year, and that is the so-called reproductive freedom abortion amendment on the ballot this November. Now, I recognize in a room like this, with lots of different perspectives, that we have different views on the subject of abortion. And I'm not going to wade into that subject tonight. I have a very strongly held view. Many of you have very strongly held views, ranging from no abortions at all, because this is God's child, to abortion up to the ninth month. I'm sure those views are all represented here, and I'm not going to get into it. You have your views, and I respect your views. This amendment is not about abortion. It is not about abortion. It is about parental rights. And how do I know that? I know that from two parts of the legislation that authorized this to be on the ballot in the fall. In the legislation, it talks about no person's right to reproductive freedom shall be infringed. It does not define that word person at all. There's no constraint on that. So a person means any person, regardless of the age of that person. And that person's sense of reproductive health shall not be infringed. That includes that person's sense of their own gender. So what this means practically for the parents in the room is that if your 10-year-old is struggling with gender dysphoria, and this is a real thing, you as a parent cannot get in the way of what they think they are. And if you are, you'll be in violation of the Maryland State Constitution if this is passed. It does not have to do with abortion. It has to do with your rights as a parent, and it is a brazen, direct attack on those rights. And that's why, regardless of your view of abortion, and I respect all the views that are represented here, you need to be a no on this amendment. Now, if you want more information about this, my good friend Deborah Brancato. Deborah, where are you? In the back here. Deborah, right back here with the Health Not Harm Coalition. They have a table in the hallway. Please stop by, talk with Deborah. She can give you all the details. You can sign up and be an active no on this amendment. So let me just finish with a few thoughts about what we can do to get engaged in this fight. The most important thing that all of us can do is to have good relationships with our spouses and with our kids. Amidst the craziness, these crazy ideas that Darren talked about and that we're talking about tonight, the best pill that you can give to your kid to resist this virus that is ripping through the schools is your relationship with them. And so how is your relationship with your kids? Are you on speaking terms? Do they like hanging out with you? As much as teenagers can. I realize that. Okay, it's a big ask. But you're going to be the one who will guide them through this crazy time. And so I would just encourage all of you to reprioritize relationships that you have with your family. That's the most important thing you can do. Your presence here, getting involved, showing up is a huge endorsement. Talking to elected leaders at all levels of government about this. And the question you should ask is one simple question, and that is, do you believe that parents are the primary authority for their children's lives? That's the question. And if it's not a quick yes right away, that's not your candidate. Period. End of story. You can run for office, right? Maybe you've thought about that to get that view across. write letters to the editor. You know, Armstrong Williams had a wonderful column on transgenderism about 3 weeks ago in the Baltimore Sun. It's a new day at the Baltimore Sun, by the way. It's readable again. He had a wonderful column on transgenderism. I sent him a little note because we've had some correspondence back before. I just thanked him for this wonderful column. They ended up printing my little private email to Armstrong Williams in the paper. Mine was the only positive letter written in the paper praising him for his view on this subject. So our letters make a difference, friends. Get involved in that. And then finally, show up. Show up. Do what other parents have done effectively to engage these issues. And as we were planning this summit a couple of weeks ago, this all came together very, very quickly tonight. I was thinking to myself, what's an effective illustration of parents who have stood up and engaged on these issues? And immediately my mind came to our next speaker. In Maryland, I would say there are very few examples of parents who have stood up, and we've got both of them here, but I'll focus on our friends from Montgomery County. Ishmael Royer is with the Coalition of Virtue. This is the coalition of parents from Montgomery County, primarily Muslim parents, who stood up against the exploitation and the usurpation that the school board in Montgomery County took away from their parents. They stood up against this and they said, no, we believe that children are created in the image and likeness of God, male and female, and that God has put those children in families. We have a sacred trust to raise those kids as virtuous citizens, and we're not going to let you take that away from us at Montgomery County Public Schools. So Ishmael, please come and share. Sumira is going to come and share their experience from Montgomery County as an illustration for us this evening.
Sorry. Bismillah. Just want to begin in the name of God. So I'm Samira Munshi. I'm the executive director of the Coalition of Virtue. And like Jeff mentioned, COVE, as we call it, is an organization that arose from unfortunate circumstances, but I think it was really beautiful how the organization actually was able to come together and I think really changed how a lot of people view grassroots organizing and the impact that it can have, particularly from a traditionally conservative side of the aisle. So I guess I'm going to start with the story of Montgomery County. So what was happening in Montgomery County, Maryland, was the school, MCPS, Montgomery County Public Schools, they had introduced a curriculum into their, not only into their sexual education program, but into their language arts program, including LGBTQ, gender ideology, and sexuality curriculum in their program. And at first, when they introduced this curriculum, they allowed parents and families who were not comfortable having their children in those classes be able to opt out of sitting in those classrooms. So parents were able to have their children be read different stories than the ones that were featured, including LGBTQ characters, and trying to persuade children into having a particular view about gender and sexuality. And then later on, what had happened was the school kind of silently, quietly revoked this opportunity to opt out. They kind of released it behind the scenes just on a random page on their website that, opt-out is no longer going to be allowed for the coming year. And obviously parents were outraged. And I think this is what really brought together, this is the catalyst that really made parents realize we can't keep sitting by on this stuff. We have to come together, we have to really organize. And I think particularly in the Muslim community, our community doesn't have a great history of independent organizing, of coming together and really speaking for what our values, are. On the face of it, for so long we've kind of been silent on a lot of values that we care about, which is a bit unfortunate. So I think on this issue, Muslim parents came together and they really wanted to make this a big issue. They wanted to make it not just that some parents have an issue with a local, policy. They wanted to make it real for everyone. And I think that is what the most important part about what happened in Montgomery County is that it really showed people that the other side will try to get you to downplay your grievances. They'll try to get you to say, this policy is bad, but, I guess it could be worse, so we'll move on. But you can't let them do that to you. And I really am very proud of the parents and the community members in Montgomery County because they didn't let that happen. They didn't let, this school board who, had a lot of power and influence, kind of strong-arm them into allowing things that they weren't okay with. So what happened is the parents got together, they discussed amongst themselves, they formed a parents coalition primarily of just parents from Montgomery County. But from there, they reached out to their friends. And not only their friends, but I think what was really crucial about what happened is they reached out to institutions. They reached out to community leaders. They reached out to national connections that they had to make this a bigger issue than what it was supposed to be. From what happened in Montgomery County, it was supposed to be a local story, but it gained national media attention. There were articles written about it in New York Times. The president of Coalition of Virtue, Kareem Manib, he was featured on Fox. There was so much hatred about this particular issue, and I think it was because people expected us to be quiet. They expected us to just roll over like so many other communities have. And what I really want to encourage all of you to do is don't roll over. Don't let them tell you that this isn't something to speak up about. And I know a lot of people who, particularly very sincere people, they think, why should I complain? Why, I shouldn't just keep complaining or, being frustrated about it. It's not something I'm supposed to do. But I would argue it's only complaining if nothing changes. And we need to kind of shift our mentality that we're not complaining about this issue. This is something that's very real and it really affects us and our families. We're not complaining about it. We want to do something about it. And I think that's what we need to go into these situations with, that mindset that we want to do something about it. We're not here to sit and complain and make a fuss about it. We're doing it for a good cause. We're doing it for a good reason. And I think when we have that mindset, driving us in what we do, we begin to realize that a lot of the restrictions we place on ourselves to be good organizers, to be community leaders, they kind of fall away. And I think that is what happened in Montgomery County, is parents, they realized we don't just need to reach out to our community, we should be reaching out to everyone. All of us should be involved in this, everyone. And like Jeff mentioned, there's so many backgrounds represented here today, and there's so many backgrounds represented in Montgomery County. So the organization that I work for is primarily a Muslim organization, but we worked with Catholics, we worked with Orthodox Christians, we worked with Christians of all denominations, people of no faith at all, people of all different faiths. And I think that was something that was very important to recognize, is that we don't need to align on every single issue to work with someone. We don't need to, we don't need to kind of reinvent the wheel every time one of us has an issue, because we're all fighting for the same issue. We're all working on, the same problems. We have the same values. We should stand together, and that's what they fear. They're worried about us standing together and talking to each other and reaching out to each other and really, getting things done. Because if they keep us separated, it's the old saying, divide and conquer. They keep us separated. They keep us, afraid of each other. They keep us, worried about, if I reach out to them, I don't know their customs. I don't know, particularly what they stand for. I don't know who they are. But just look at what different communities are saying. Don't listen to what people are saying about those communities. If you see someone in your community who is standing on the same side of an issue that you are, go introduce yourself, reach out to them, talk to them, say, hey, I really care about this too. What can we do about it? How can we bring together our communities? And this is what I think was really magical about Montgomery County, is Muslim families who had no contact with people of other faiths, people of other communities, had barely any foot in the door in terms of political organizing, but they really cared about their children and they cared about the issue. And they started reaching out to their contacts in media, in policy organizations, in lawyers. They reached out to Islamic scholars even, to a point where a large group of Islamic scholars were pushed to come out with a statement of what Islam believes about gender and sexuality to support the court case that was going on in Montgomery County, to support Muslim families, to support the idea that they actually do have a legitimate claim to religious freedom on this issue. So I think reaching out to different segments of your own community that you don't necessarily realize would fit together, reach out to your scholars of your community, reach out to your religious leaders, reach out to community leaders. And something that I think is really, really crucial, reach out to people who don't have a stake in the issue. I myself am not a parent. And when I walked in here, someone asked if I was 13. but I'm very proud. I'm very proud to be working on this issue as someone who's not, directly involved, because all of us are involved. This is something that affects communities. This is why we should be fighting for it. It affects our communities. It doesn't affect just one family. It doesn't affect our family. It affects everyone. So I would encourage you, reach out to your children even, get them involved. We had 6-year-olds testifying in front of Montgomery County Public Schools. They were testifying. We had college students, we had MCPS graduates, we had people of all ages, races, colors, religions testifying and fighting for this issue together. And I think what's really important on this issue is, make your issues, make your values important enough that others want to join in. Make what you're doing so important to yourself that others see the importance in it and want to join in. I'm just so, I'm so grateful, and I'm humbled to be able to have the position that I do working for this organization. Because like I said, I'm not a parent, but I really believe that you don't need to be a parent to care about what children are learning in schools. You don't need to be a parent. You don't need to be a parent to want to change society, to have better for your society. So I think, I guess that would be my advice. Reach out to people you don't know. Reach out to people who you do know, your children, like I said, even if you have grandchildren, college-age people, anyone that you can, get across to, reach out to them, talk to them, have a conversation about them. Even if you don't even know if they'll be an ideal candidate for what you're talking about. Sometimes people surprise you. Talk to them, get to know their values. And also, if you don't know where to start, I would say reach out to individuals, but also reach out to organizations like Maryland Family Institute. Reach out to organizations like Alliance Defending Freedom, Religious Freedom Institute, Coalition of Virtue. These organizations came together for this cause. We came together to help you. So if you want something done, you have an issue that you need to get, solved and you don't really know how, reach out to us. We're here for you. This is our job. We want to be, working together on these issues. With that, I just want to say thank you for letting me speak, and I'm going to turn it over.
And thank you again, Samira. Our next speaker is Ismail Royer. He's a father, community leader, and serves as the director of the Islam and Religious Freedom Action Team for the Religious Freedom Institute.
Thank you, Darren. So first I want to say to all of you, thank you so much for coming. I'm really proud of each and every one of you and honored to speak in front of you. And the fact that you came here tonight really says a lot about what's important to you and what your values are. And number one is the children. So I'm director of the Islam and Religious Freedom section, Islam and Religious Freedom section at the Religious Freedom Institute. As Darren mentioned, the Religious Freedom Institute is a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. It's a multi-faith organization. There's no particular faith that it represents, but it does stand for the proposition that all men are created equal, men and women, and endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights. And one of those rights is the right to religious freedom. And very closely related to religious freedom is the right of parents to raise their children as they see fit. That is a right that is in the Constitution. It's found through the 14th Amendment. That's a legal argument we can talk about, but be assured that that is a right that you have as a human being. As a parent, you have a right to raise your children, and you have a right to a parental relationship with your children, and your children have a right to a relationship with you. And your children have, that's a right that is shared between parents and children. So I first want to say that I am taking credit for Samira because I first met Samira. Maybe she doesn't want me to say this. I first met her at a conference that I spoke at. It was a conference of conservative students and conservative college students in Washington, D.C. And I saw a table of Orthodox Jews and one Muslim young woman in hijab sitting with them, and I said, "Oh, that's really cool. Let me go see what's going on here." And and they were all eating kosher food. They had a kosher food set up, and we Muslims also kosher food is lawful for us to eat in our religion. So she was sitting there mainly for the food, but they were involved in a really interesting conversation about values and politics and so on, and because we shared those values on those issues. Now, as Samira mentioned, there are many things that we can disagree with about many things, but there is so much that we have in common ground with one another, and so Samira became my intern at the Religious Freedom Institute, and then got involved in Montgomery County. And this became a wonderful opportunity for her to get involved in the community. But I want to say for a moment how I got involved in the parental rights issue. I was certainly, I'm working at the Religious Freedom Institute. It's part of my job to advocate for religious freedom for everyone, and for as a result of that, parental rights for everyone. But I have a personal story that really drives my that drives me to care about parental rights. So I'm a father of 6, and my son, one of my sons, this is he was a student at Fairfax County in public schools, and I don't know how much you all have heard about Fairfax County Public Schools, but it's in bad shape. It's in bad shape there, and my son, he was really, and he was a freshman. He was really into theater, and he was always telling me about his theater teacher, this woman, and I went with my son to a county fair, to a fair out in Fairfax County, where his theater class was doing improv, and he said, "Oh, there's my teacher." So I went to go try to introduce myself to her because I had heard so much about her, and she turned her back on me. I thought that was really weird, and I thought maybe I'm misinterpreting something. Maybe she didn't hear me, and I'm saying, "Hello, Miss." I'm not going to say her name. "Hello, Miss Smith. How are you doing? I'm so and so's father," and she turned her back on me again. And no, I could not. She wouldn't let me approach her, and I never did. I never was able to approach her that day. I thought it was so weird. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, honestly, this is not how civilized, this is how not normal human behavior, actually. You know what I mean? It's not sane behavior. So I had the occasion to go and talk to her about my son's grade. And so I went to her class, and I said, "Hello, this is, I'm so-and-so's father, and I wanted to speak with you about my son's grade." And she was so hostile to me. Now she couldn't turn her back on me. I'm looking at her. She was so hostile to me, and is it just me? Am I crazy? And I at the same time noticed my son saying some strange things. He was raising some issues, actually really deep religious issues, like kind of about doubts. He was having doubts about his faith. And that's actually normal. I mean, for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old kid to be, asking questions about his religion and so on. But he was coming from like really, really interesting angles. And he's a really smart kid anyway. But, as we talked more about the issues and I'm trying to help him with, work through these doubts, he shared with me that it was his teacher that was talking to him about these things. And then he started talking to me as well about sexuality and about sexual things, and that he had a crush on a boy, and so on and so on, and that his teacher had told him that his parents were fundamentalists, and that they should not listen to that. He should not listen to his parents, and that they didn't understand him like she did, and and so on. And I mean, his mother and I were shocked. Absolutely shocked, and we demanded a meeting with the teacher and with the assistant principal and the counselor, and we instantly had a meeting, and demanded a meeting. We had the meeting, and the teacher who was present, as I was describing the conversations I'd been having with my son, she burst into tears and had a big, emotional fit, and ran out of the room. And then and I was being as professional and as polite as I could, but the school officials acted as if I had said something mean and rude to her, and I swear to God, I was actually the nicest. I mean, I thought I was being, my child's mother thought that I was being too nice. And that's how polite I'm being, and I'm trying to kind of be the good cop, and she's the bad cop, and and still, we never were able to get the school to take responsibility for this absolutely inappropriate behavior from the teacher. And my son was so enamored, so into this teacher as his friend. She was very young, by the way. She had probably just very recently graduated from high school, blue hair and all that. And I respect. If someone wants to do what they want to do, great. But there's certain things that are adding up for me. That are and my son has now graduated. This was about 4 years ago, and he and I are still working through some things. But I'll tell you one thing. First of all, this is really important to what Jeff said, that it's our relationship that we had that is allowing us to work through these things. And I keep telling him over and over and over, you are my son, and I love you. It doesn't matter what you think, believe, do. You're always my son, and you can always come to me, even though I disagree. I don't approve of, some of your. I don't agree with some of your, with some of what you think and do and so on. But that does not change anything about. I said I would still die for you. I would still die for you. I would actually consider that an honor, to have died, because we all have to die. If I had to die defending my son from some harm, someone tried to shoot him or hurt him or kill him, and maybe I'm being a little emotional here, and but I mean, honestly, that's how I told him. That's how much I love you. That's what it means to be a parent. And so what I want to, and so when this, situation started happening in Montgomery County, I had to get involved in that. I mean, I really felt what these parents are feeling, because these parents, their children come home one day and they say, hey, we're reading some really weird stuff in class today, It's like, and the parents are horrified, and I knew where they were coming from, And look, here's the thing. It may be that someone actually believes the same things that are being put into those books, that they're making kids read. All right, well, but that person who, for example, I have a daughter. I have many daughters, but one of my daughters, she actually is also kind of the same views. She believes that people should be able to love who they want and have, and she has some very strange ideas that are not part of our religion. But she still says it's not right for that stuff to be imposed on kids. You know what I mean? Like imagine if a teacher had taken a child and said, okay, your parents are these liberal crazies. What you need to know is that, is that God is to be obeyed, and we have to worship Him. And here's the Bible or the Quran or something like that. It would be a violation of the Establishment Clause, and it would and they would the folks on the left side of the aisle would be up in arms about something like that, right? And rightfully so, because it's not the job in a public school. It's not the job of teachers to indoctrinate children into anything. The schools, public schools, have one. There is one legitimate thing that they can teach children, and that is citizenship. That is, when it comes to values, that is to want for others what they want, what we want for ourselves. That is what citizenship boils down to. I want for others what I want for myself, and I should treat others with the respect that is due to them as human beings. That is what citizenship is all about, and to work for the common good. But beyond that, it is not their job to teach children values. It is the job of parents. And so I just want to leave this by saying, really, be aware of what is going on in your child's school, and always kind of think about alternatives to public school. Keep always a plan B. If you see something going a little crazy, do stand and fight and struggle in that. But if you can, and not everyone has alternatives, but if you can, think about Catholic school. Think about different religious schools. Think about private schools. Think about homeschooling, because it's your kid's life. All right. Thank you. And.
All right. Thank you so much, Ismail. And our next speaker is a mother, a community leader, somebody who I appreciate, who has donated gifts every Christmas for the past 4 years at our youth mentorship program. Also, she's running for Congress against Johnny O, so she needs all our support. Kimberly Klasick.
Thank you so much. Good evening. How are you? All right. The one thing I learned about being in radio is time management, so I'm going to get us back on track just a little bit. But I wanted to make sure that we knew that this is not really political, right? I think parental rights is not Republican, Democrat, independent. It is unaffiliated. I think we all want rights over our children when it comes to what is going on in these schools. So I just want to make sure up front that just know that this is not an endorsement from anybody that's here today. I am just here to tell you, yes, I'm running for Maryland's 2nd Congressional District. Yes, I am running against Johnny Olszewski. And I just want to make sure you don't forget what you felt during the pandemic and the lockdowns as parents. And so that is my message tonight. Do not forget. Do not forget. Just recently, thank you. Just recently, I was able to go on a Fox affiliate here locally and talk about the fact that in Baltimore County, our schools were locked down longer and our businesses were locked down longer than other surrounding jurisdictions. And because Governor Larry Hogan wanted to leave it up to each jurisdiction, you had people like Johnny Olszewski and Mayor Brandon Scott say, you know what? I'm going to tell you what you can do. I'm going to tell you when you can worship. I'm going to tell you when you can assemble. I'm going to tell you when your business can or cannot open. And I'm going to tell you when your kid can go back to school. And when your kid could have a mask on their face, which we found out later was what? Nothing at all. Absolutely nothing at all. And many of us already knew this, right? And so I just want you to not forget what we went through, especially here in Baltimore County. I thought it's interesting because here we are at the Sheridan, and how many times in the news now have we seen the Towson Town Center? Juveniles, right? Juveniles. Meanwhile, these are the same kids that they continue to lower the standard and lower the bar for, right? When they talk about what kids are doing nowadays, why they're on the streets, what's the number one issue? Usually because of lack of education. And so we should be championing that here. And so again, I just don't want you guys to forget what happened during those lockdowns. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican. It is our rights. Those are our children. I am not gonna be able to stay long tonight. I have a 7-year-old daughter, just so you know. That's my favorite job of them all, is being a mom. And so tomorrow she has an award ceremony at her school. And you know what she asked me today? She said, Mom, what if you come and I don't get an award? And I said, well, guess what? That means you need to work a little harder now, don't you? Right? We're not doing the participation trophies around here. But I did have my daughter in a Catholic school. We were very blessed to be able to do so. But my daughter struggled. All last summer, she didn't get to go to summer camp. She didn't get to go play sports. She was in tutoring because she was 4 years old during the pandemic, and they had masks on their face. So while they were trying to learn to read, right, that's that age, she had a mask on her face. Her teacher had a mask on her face. And so some of the time it was virtual. And so she never really got to learn to read at that moment. So we spent all summer and a ton of money putting her in tutoring. And I know there's many parents in this room that is going through the same thing. I just want you to know that you're not alone, and we can fight back. And I just will say, don't forget to vote on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And our next speaker is a community leader, is a member of the Carroll County, Maryland community, and the chair of the Carroll County chapter of Moms for Liberty, Kit Hart.
Thank you. Good evening. It is so amazing and empowering to be around so many other fellow patriots tonight, gathered around an issue that is so fundamental that it predates our Constitution, the issue of parental rights. Thank you so much to Tim for putting this together. I know it was a tireless effort that you worked for many years on, so thank you to you and your team. As Darren mentioned, my name is Kit Hart. I'm with Moms for Liberty. Our movement began in 2021 when unelected bureaucrats decided that the comfort of adults was more important than the needs of our children. Moms across the country were given a glance behind the education curtain only to discover that instead of sending their kids to school to learn and be educated and be challenged, they were going sent into those schools to be heavily indoctrinated into a leftist radical worldview. But the thing is that this indoctrination didn't just begin in 2020. It's been a decades-long process that began when compulsory education was mandated, which required parents to send their kids away from home to be educated. So actually, prior to the 18th century, virtually everybody was educated at home. And guess what the literacy rate was during that time? It was 95%. But everything changed when, of course, the government intervened and education was institutionalized. The pioneer of public education himself, John Dewey, envisioned a public education system that resembled that of the Soviet Union, in fact. And he believed that it was the goal not so much of kids to necessarily gain knowledge and wisdom and understanding that was needed for individual flourishment, but more that they needed to be socialized to benefit the collective. So now, decades later, students have been transformed into change agents. Instead of teaching that 2 + 2 = 4, they are being asked, how do you feel about 2 + 2 = 4? In social emotional learning programs, and I hope everybody remembers that word, social emotional learning, that they're weaved throughout the entire curricula of every subject. Students are being taught that feelings should be prioritized over facts. And it's created generations of citizens who are uneducated and thereby very easily manipulated. Can you believe that just last year, there were 23 schools in the city of Baltimore that had 0 students who were proficient in math? Throughout the state, and I know Darren mentioned this, but just the state as a whole, only 33% of Maryland 8th grade students were proficient in reading, and 25% passed the state math exam. However, this is the curious part, the graduation rate, anybody want to guess? 87%. And that's because 87% of kids were learning what the government wanted them to know. And you know what? We, the parents, we've had enough. We just want our schools to do the one thing that they are intended to do, and that is to teach our kids. Our government employees and unelected bureaucrats are not invited to our dinner table to discuss our religion or to our bedrooms to deliberate our beliefs on sex. They simply have opposing doctrines than we do, and their unwritten catechism is dichotomous to ours. Moms for Liberty is based on the belief that parents have the fundamental right to direct the education and upbringing of our children, and we do not co-parent with the government. Thank you. Once parents lose these fundamental rights, this sweet land of liberty will cease to exist. You know, every thriving society recognizes two unique distinctions. They work to uphold these two unique distinctions: the distinction between a man and a woman, and the distinction between a child and an adult. The trans cult, and yes, it's a cult, along with every other government, every other powerful institution, are working hand in hand to blur those distinctions. We see this in the demonization of masculinity, the erasure of women's private spaces, and the destruction of childhood innocence. In order to protect our children, we need to view every cultural issue as a matter of child protection. We're either going to protect children or victimize them. But I know which path all of us here will be choosing. The lions have been awakened, and we will not go back to sleep. Until our children are offered soccer over screens, geography over gender studies, and Dr. Seuss over sexuality education, we will fight for the right to protect and properly educate our children. Our rights as parents were given to us by God, and they cannot be taken away. I invite you to join us to preserve parental rights and childhood innocence in a culture that treats adults as children and children as adults. It's an uphill battle for sure, but it is our duty to climb it. And each of us here was born for such a time as this. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Kit. Our next speaker is Father Ed Meeks. Father Ed Meeks is a pastor at Emirates of Christ the King Catholic Church in Towson. He founded Christ of King as an Angelical parish in 1996 when it was an Anglican priest. In 2012, he was reordained as a Catholic priest and led the entire parish into the Catholic Church. His weekly podcast, You Can Go Home Again, currently has 35,000 subscribers. Let's welcome Father Ed Meeks.
Thank you, Darren, and good evening, everyone. It's good to be with you all. So before I begin to say what I want to say to you this evening, I'd like to address a question that is no doubt on the minds of at least a few of you. And it's actually a question that I had to answer in my own mind a few months ago when the organizers of this event approached me and asked me if I would be the keynote speaker this evening. The question is, why would a Catholic priest be chosen to speak at an event like this on parental power? And more to the point, what would that Catholic priest have to say that would contribute to the conversation in a meaningful way? So when I was first approached, I thought to myself, this is a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I'm going to have to think and pray about this before I agree to this assignment. But as I did think and pray, something significant occurred to me, namely that this subject, the subject of parental power, has a direct connection to one of my real passions, namely the passion for the protection of religious liberty. In other words, I believe that there is a direct nexus between the subject of religious liberty and the subject of parental power. More about that nexus later. Secondly, while clearly not everyone here this evening is Catholic, this issue we are talking about, as has already been pointed out, transcends religious belief in the same way that it transcends political parties, or should. That fact should be clear from the diversity of speakers that we have on the schedule, as well as the diversity of organizations that we have represented in the back on the tables here this evening. Because this has everything to do with us as parents proclaiming assertively by our words and by our deeds that our children are not wards of the state. And because they are not, we know better than the state does what is best for our children. And by the way, a memo to the LGBTQ community. We do not hate you, not in the least. So please do not accuse us of hate. We do not hate you. For those of us who are Christians, that is never, ever an option. We just want our kids left alone. And by our kids, let me clarify that if you are not aware of it, I am, through a generous dispensation by then Pope Benedict XVI, a dispensation on behalf of former Anglican priests, which I once was, I am a Roman Catholic priest who is also a married man. My wonderful wife, Jan, and I have been married for almost 54 years. She's here with me this evening. We are Thank you. We are blessed to have 4 grown children who are also here this evening. And thank you. And those 4 children have blessed us with 19 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. So you might say that I, along with you, have a dog in this fight. So then I'd like to begin this evening with a quote from St. Peter the Apostle. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to be preaching a sermon this evening, although, Darren, this looks like a congregation, doesn't it? The context of this quote is chapter 5 of the Acts of the Apostles. It takes place probably only weeks or months after Jesus' ascension to heaven and the descent of the Holy Spirit at Pentecost. Peter and the other apostles have been dragged into the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling council in Jerusalem at the time, and they're being interrogated by the Pharisees on the council for teaching the people in the name of Christ, and are once again ordered to stop as they had been previously. Acts chapter 5, verse 29. Peter, speaking for the apostles, responds and says simply this, quote, "We must obey God rather than men." We must obey God rather than men. As you read further, you see that the Sanhedrin's reaction to Peter's bold proclamation was that they became enraged and they wanted to kill the apostles. And the ultimate result of this confrontation was that the stage was set for a protracted persecution of the church by the religious leadership in Jerusalem. That persecution was then superseded by an even bloodier, more oppressive persecution that lasted for 250 years under the Roman Empire. Why? Again, because the early Christians chose to obey God rather than men, when men were telling them first to stop teaching in the name of Jesus, and then that they had to worship the pagan gods of Rome, something that the early Christians were not willing to do. And as you read the accounts of those early martyrs of the church, you continually find them speaking truth to power in repeating to the authorities of the day some variation of Peter's words, "We must obey God rather than men." All through the 2,000-year history of the church, it has been the same whenever and wherever the church has suffered persecution, as it does to this day in various parts of the world. And yet, as 21st century Americans, when you and I contemplate religious persecution, our minds automatically kind of compartmentalize it into a phenomenon that was long ago or today is far away. And if our sensitivities are jogged by something we read about the oppression of Christians in Somalia or Yemen or Nigeria or China or North Korea or anywhere else in the world, we might respond by whispering a quick prayer for our persecuted brothers and sisters and then consoling ourselves with the thought that it couldn't happen here. Could it? After all, don't we have a Constitution that guarantees us the freedom of religion in America? While that is true in principle, I would point out to you that the influence of two pervasive trends in our modern culture can, and in fact already have begun, to erode those freedoms that should be guaranteed to all people of faith in the U.S. Constitution. One of those trends is statism, and the other is secularism. Statism and secularism. Let's take a moment to define those terms. Statism is the ideological tendency to amass more and more power to the government, especially the central government, for the purpose of controlling and regulating both the lives of individuals and the affairs of institutions. It is a philosophy in which the state, especially at the federal level, becomes in effect a god. Secularism, on the other hand, is a worldview defined by the initiative to remove every vestige of religious expression or conviction from the public square and from public institutions. Thus, statism and secularism are merely two sides of the same coin. And these two forces have been on the ascendancy in our nation, a very rapid ascendancy, particularly for the past 60 years. And today have reached a point of conversion to the point where most statists are secularists and vice versa. The terms have become virtually synonymous. That convergence of statism and secularism typically manifests itself in the pervasive ideology known as, you know it, socialism. If you know anything about the history of socialism in the 20th and 21st centuries, whether in Eastern Europe or Latin America or Asia or elsewhere, its proponents have always viewed the church, I might add especially the Catholic Church, as the biggest obstacle to the advancement of its goals, and thus have viewed the church as a force to be neutralized and silenced by whatever means necessary. Now let's get real here for a moment. The current presidential administration is fully populated with avowed statists and secularists, all the way to the very top, as is their party. So, as we did then with the Obama administration, we find ourselves today with a presidential administration that has positioned itself as an adversary of the church. A position that has resulted in tension and in legal and philosophical conflict between the federal government and the church. And so we see evidence today that religious liberty is already being eroded in a serious and systematic way. And we are confronted by the once unthinkable prospect of the potential for out-and-out persecution of Christians and other people of faith in America in the future. What we are seeing in our culture is that by accelerating incremental steps through legislation, through executive orders, through regulatory practices and mandates, through court rulings, and through aggressive and very questionable actions by the Department of Justice, the government at both the federal and state levels has been putting the squeeze on the consciences of believers and infringing on the free exercise of religion, the First Amendment notwithstanding. And by the way, it's no coincidence that the very first freedom delineated by the founders in the First Amendment in the Constitution's Bill of Rights is freedom of religion. Let me remind you of exactly what it says. Quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The convergence of statism and secularism has quickly moved our government from its perennial stance of benign neutrality toward religion, notably toward Christianity, to a stance of ever-growing and ever more aggressive hostility toward Christians, and especially, I might add, toward the Catholic Church. The examples are numerous, but I'll give you just a few to illustrate. But before I do that, let me show you how I believe, as I mentioned a moment ago, that there is this direct nexus or connection between the subjects of religious liberty and parental authority. To begin with, as you have already heard previously, parental authority is a God-given right, like virtually all of our rights, beginning with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Never, ever forget that our rights are not granted by the federal government. To the contrary, it is the government's responsibility to protect those God-given rights. What we have seen in recent years, however, is the government not only failing to protect those rights, but actively and assertively infringing upon them. So then a few examples, and all of these will be from a Catholic perspective, since that's the universe that I operate in. But those of you who come from different religious traditions can, I am sure, call to mind examples from your own faith context. I'll begin with one of the first and most significant shots across the bow of religious liberty by the federal government in recent years. You will all remember the HHS mandate, one of the most egregious provisions of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which sought to force all employer-sponsored health care plans to provide, among other things, free, abortifacient, and contraceptive drugs to its employees, in direct contradiction of the Catholic Church's and many other Christian churches' moral teachings. But it was nonetheless applied to countless Catholic institutions, including, most notably, remember this, the Little Sisters of the Poor, who filed suit against the federal government. That mandate was, as you may know, dealt a principled blow by the Supreme Court's decision in the Hobby Lobby case. Another example. The U.S. Department of Justice has essentially declared war on Catholics and other Christians who pray peacefully in front of abortion facilities, invoking the FACE Act against them. FACE is an acronym for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. One such Catholic is a man by the name of Mark Houck. On September the 23rd, 2022, if you're not aware of this, a team of 20 armed FBI agents in tactical gear raided Mark Houck's home in rural Pennsylvania in the early hours of the morning and arrested him at gunpoint in front of his terrified wife and 7 children, putting him in handcuffs and leg shackles. He was charged with violating the FACE Act from an incident that had taken place a year earlier when he pushed a volunteer on the sidewalk in front of a Philadelphia abortion facility where Houck and his 12-year-old son had been praying peacefully. The abortion facility's volunteer had begun aggressively harassing Houck's son when Houck, like any good father would, came to his son's defense. The abortion volunteer brought charges against Houck, but those charges were dismissed by both state and local authorities. The federal DOJ, however, did file charges that Houck violated the FACE Act, and despite Houck and his attorneys offering that he would come in voluntarily to respond to the charges, they sent the FBI to raid his home and arrest him. Houck was ultimately acquitted of all charges in a January 2023 jury trial. We also have the more recent case of 9 Christian pro-lifers recently given felony convictions and prison sentences, federal prison sentences ranging from 2 to 5 years by a D.C. court for protesting at a Washington abortuary. And by the way, all of this is taking place against a backdrop of the DOJ and FBI virtually turning a blind eye to the rampant and widespread vandalism against Christian pro-life pregnancy centers, some of which have literally been burned to the ground, with few or no arrests made and no investigations initiated. Another example. You are aware, I'm sure, about the well-documented report that the FBI, until they were recently caught red-handed, had authorized surveillance in traditional Catholic parishes, citing traditional Catholics as potential terrorists. This would be laughable if it weren't so sad. With all the rampant crime in America, this is what our federal government is choosing to investigate and to spend our tax dollars on. And then finally, there's the recent controversy involving Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker. Let me summarize this case for you. This was an authentic Catholic husband and father delivering an authentic Catholic commencement address at an authentic Catholic college. And the reaction, predictably, from the mainstream media and many on social media was sneering contempt. By the way, they no doubt believe that this meeting this evening is a gathering of dangerous extremists. Have you thought about that? So turn around for a minute so you can see what your fellow dangerous extremists look like. Doesn't look that dangerous from up here. The truth is, the only thing we are a danger to is their own extremist thinking and their radical ideological indoctrination of our children. All of this represents the very tip of the iceberg in terms of what the totalitarian statists and secularists and their allies in the media and elsewhere have as their end game, their ultimate agenda, which is the complete marginalization and silencing of religion. And so the American people need to arise from lethargy, need to get stirred both to prayer and to action, and we need to be courageous and resolute in defending the truth in the midst of a perverse and hostile culture. I realize that's not easy by any means, and there might be a price to pay for doing so. There usually is. But it is absolutely necessary if our children and grandchildren are to grow up in a free country. So by now you might be saying, okay, I got all that. I understand everything you've just said, but what does it all have to do with parental authority? I would suggest to you that it has a lot to do with it. Because at a minimum, for example, the same FBI that has identified traditional Catholics as potential terrorists has made the same terrorist identification of parents who show up to school board meetings to peacefully monitor what their children are being taught and to make their opinions known. And here's where the religious liberty connection comes in. Whether you are Catholic or Protestant, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or a person of no particular faith tradition, the simple, irrefutable truth is this: you love your children, and you want nothing but the best for them. And whether you realize it or not, that's simply part of the natural law. The natural law is nothing more than the law of God written on the hearts of all men and women intuitively and instinctively. It's like the self-evident natural law that says, do not commit murder. Everyone knows murder is grievously wrong. And the natural law that says, do not harm children by sexualizing them or by exposing them to dangerous and nonsensical ideologies that their tender young minds cannot possibly fathom or discern. And so, ladies and gentlemen, recognize and acknowledge this in your hearts and minds. Children are a gift from God. And as such, they come into our care with certain rights and certain responsibilities for us as parents. We have an absolute God-given right and an absolute God-given responsibility to protect them. And if ever there was a time they needed protection from the dangerous and ill-conceived initiatives of a misguided, overbearing government, it is now. Let me take this thought a step further. We as parents and grandparents have a God-given right and obligation specifically to protect the bodies, minds, and souls of our children and grandchildren in the face of secular governments which, left to their own designs, would destroy their bodies, minds, and souls. Now, is that a rash statement to assert that secular government would destroy the bodies, minds, and souls of our children and grandchildren? I don't think so. Because how then do we explain the widespread impetus to administer puberty-blocking drugs to prepubescent children, or to sexually and permanently mutilate adolescent children in the name of transgenderism? How do we explain the near-rabid move to expose children as young as 5 to pornographic books in school libraries? Or to have them attend and participate in drag queen shows in public libraries? How do we explain the soul-robbing push to indoctrinate school-aged children with critical race theory, CRT, which teaches them the dangerous absurdity that depending solely on what color skin they have, they are either the oppressor or the oppressed? And by the way, please, I urge you, as Jeff spoke about just a few moments ago, please plan to vote against the proposed amendment to Maryland's Constitution this November, the amendment entitled Right to Reproductive Freedom, because as we have already heard, it is a deceitful misnaming of a bill that will strip parents of their authority over health care decisions for their children. Let me pause here and read something to you from what you might think is an unlikely source. The Catechism of the Catholic Church. Anybody up for a catechism lesson? Deacon, I know you are. I'm going to read a few brief excerpts from the section of the Catechism entitled The Family and Society. Listen carefully to this. Quote, "The role of parents in education is of such importance that it is almost impossible to provide an adequate substitute. The right and the duty of parents to educate their children are primordial and inalienable." Let me read that sentence again. The right and the duty of parents to educate their children are primordial and inalienable. Parents have the first responsibility for the education of their children. Public authorities have the duty of guaranteeing this parental right and of ensuring the concrete conditions for its exercise. And that's the end of the quote. And by the way, let's think about one more thing, as one or two of the previous speakers have mentioned. Think back on the COVID pandemic and all the lessons we learned from that experience. I think you would agree that we learned a lot, didn't we? But I would like to focus on just two elements of what we learned, because they are so relevant for what we are addressing this evening. First, we learned how ready, willing, and able public officials are to declare churches, synagogues, mosques, and other places of worship as non-essential. Remember that term? To declare them non-essential and arbitrarily shut us down. Secondly, this goes hand in hand with it. Because of the corresponding lockdown in the nation's schools and the virtual learning that it necessitated, millions of parents across the nation began to discover and wake up to what the schools were teaching their children. And many of them, many of us, were outraged. And so here we are this evening. Let me bring this message to a close with this. I would suggest to you that of all the things in our lives that are worth standing up for and worth fighting for, the three that should be at the very top of all of our lists are the three F's: faith, family, and freedom. Faith, family, and freedom. These three transcend politics and political parties and go to the very heart of who we are as Americans who love our God, our children, and our country. Faith, family, and freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you, take a stand while there is still time. We must obey God rather than men. Thanks for listening, and God bless you all.